Gaywyck by Vincent Verga. Publisher Allison Books, Los Angeles, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 4. I have relied heavily on my journal in recreating Father Collins' narrative, trying not to alter his version of adding information gathered subsequently, or clarifying what he muddled. I have retained as much as possible the confusions he engendered as to what had in truth occurred behind the glittering facade. "What is truth?" asked Pilate, washing his hands. I have, however, made his narrative linear, eliminating the unrelated tangents that interrupted as we progressed down distracting Fifth Avenue. The carriage followed its prescribed route, carrying us past the Stewart and Astor mansions. Such lovely people who... the Buckingham Hotel, not to be faulted if... and the arch honoring Admiral Dewey at Madison Square, so elegantly aligned with the one further down honoring Washington, where, so as not to be rude by cutting too sharply into his tour speeches, I spent much of the journey maneuvering him back to the desired topic. I managed quite gracefully in the beginning, but less so as the destination approached. "How long did they wear the rings?" I blurted out finally. "Oh, I don't know, but they worked, which is all that matters. So clever." Night had fallen when we turned into 20th Street, and Gramercy Park appeared enclosed within a black wrought iron railing. Suddenly it became very quiet in this beautiful enclave. I could hear a fountain splashing from somewhere within the private park. I wondered why the sounds of the heavy traffic and public transport did not penetrate into the lovely square. We folded the soft lap blanket, and Father Collins descended to the street. I followed, slipping on the step. Then I stood speechless, staring at the 5-story red brick corner house. I told myself it was natural for me to be nervous. I told myself everything would be all right. Nothing happens by chance. Every step is counted. Every step is measured. "It's a very large house," I said. "The largest in the square. So fine." I was terrified. I told myself it was natural for me to be terrified. Was not my life at stake? What if Danough Gaylord detested me? What would I, a foundling, do alone in New York with nothing but Miss Gramont's $5 bill? I stood immobilized by this possibility, as a deer stands startled by a sudden light. "Hurry along, Robert. We mustn't keep Mr. Danough waiting." The moment he rang the glistening brass instrument, the glass-enclosed lamp over the door grew in brightness, illuminating the building's lower facade and the area in which we stood. I could see our faces in the enormous black lacquered door, which was suddenly opened by an elderly man, formally dressed. He smiled. "Good evening, Father." "Good evening, Mr. Moore. This is Robert Whyte. Mr. Danough is expecting us. He asked that you wait in the front parlor for a wee bit. Father, he won't keep you long." Glancing over my shoulder as I crossed the threshold, I noticed the lamplighter at the corner. His beam expanded rapidly, like an instantaneous moonrise merging with the light emanating from over my head. I noticed the carriage was gone. It had begun to rain. "Thank you, Mr. Moore. Tell Mr. Danough we're here, please." "No need, Father. He ain't deaf, and he's expecting no one else." "Thank you, Mr. Moore." "Thank you, Father. The main parlor, please. He'll be sending for you shortly. Mr. Whyte." The deep red entranceway was surprisingly spacious, nearly as wide and as long as a railway carriage. On the wall to my left, a large and ornately etched crystal globe covered the steady gas jet. It hung over and was reflected in a deeply polished walnut table that held a silver dish and a cut glass vase containing a massive arrangement of fall flowers of every variety. These had been chosen with such an understanding of their color values and how each shape contributed to the whole that I felt their presence as one would feel the presence of a very strong human personality. The hallway divided at the far end into a stairway and a narrower extended passage, leading to a closed black door. Mr. Moore rolled open paneled doors to my right. The parquet floor began to shimmer around me, glinting with scattered luminosity, reflecting the bright lamplight in the parlor. Luxury enveloped me as I crossed into the room. The double door shut silently behind. I thrilled to the beauty of it all. The furnishings and the paintings over the fireplace were too much for me to absorb. I had never experienced any of it in 3 dimensions. Meeting it gathered together made me laugh with excitement. Ornate Tiffany lamps hovered over elaborate Art Nouveau objects like monarch butterflies. I crossed and recrossed the room, but kept scurrying back to gaze at the painting. At first, it made me think of the flowers in the hallway, flattened and crushed into the canvas. As I looked, a form emerged, a cathedral in blinding sunlight, like St. Patrick's that very afternoon. Could the facade be made of sunlight? What an astonishing painting, Father! Whose is it? Mr. Danough's, one of his French pictures. By some fellow named Money? I think, I know, dear boy, it is awful, but don't tell him that. How I miss the Turner watercolors and the comfy chairs. These are the Impressionists, I thought. How different they look in color. If his mother were alive, she'd never tolerate it. I looked to the other side of the room and found another painting so bizarre and thrilling, I gaped at it. It was different entirely from the Monet, but somehow similar. Not bright and hot, but pale and very cool to the eye. While the first seemed to be splashes of color, this seemed to be blocks or plains. It's a landscape, I thought. It's more exciting than Monet. I glanced around the room to see if I could locate any other paintings. As my eyes rushed to the wide-open sliding doors, I saw a Japanese man. Mr. Whyte. I nodded, anxiety rising again. Mr. Gaylord will see you now. Father Collins moved to accompany me. The servant spoke again, turning his attention to the cleric. Mr. Danough wishes to see Mr. Whyte alone, Father. Would you like some sherry? Oh, yes. Thank you, Teo. I would. So kind. Does Mr. Danough want me to stay? Yes, Father. He wishes to thank you personally for your kind help in this matter. I looked at Father Collins, who smiled encouragingly. I smiled weakly. Teo bowed and invited me to follow. We walked back into the foyer, turned to the right, and I waited while Teo closed the parlor doors. Passing beyond the flowers, we began ascending the stairs. As we climbed, I noticed that the walls were covered with red silk embossed with minuscule red velvet columbines. The foyer light dappled the stairwell, merging with a similar one, shining out from a half-open door at the top of the stairs. Teo announced our arrival by 2 light taps. A deep male voice answered affirmatively, authoritatively. Teo slowly pushed open the door and entered, saying my name softly. Heart pounding in trepidation, I waited on the landing outside. I registered nothing at first, but flickering light until I noticed on the blue wall inside yet another painting similar to the landscape downstairs. It shocked me. The jolt was not of bewilderment, but of delight. I had perceived it immediately as a landscape, not a palette or puzzle, but a vision. The more I see of these pictures, I thought, pleasantly distracted, the more I'll understand. It's learning to see. Teo passed me in the doorway. He bade me enter. I hesitated a few heartbeats before walking into Danough Gaylord's study. Even now, aeons later, my senses quicken as the memory of that moment takes hold of me. My soul slumbered and was soon to be awakened. I want to eradicate all that has accrued around him. I want to regain in all its purity my first impression of our first brief encounter. I am sitting in that same study now. It is approximately the same time of day at the same time of year. The Cézanne is still on the wall, and I glance at it whenever I look up from my writing. My journal for that day is open beside me, helping me reclaim states of mind long gone, helping unravel the skein of diverse feelings and uncover nuance buried by the decades. Happiness once accepted obliterates memories of fear and pain. Last night, I dreamed. I climbed again that columbine-covered stairwell. In my dream, its walls were aflame, undaunted. I moved upward, easily reaching the door, encouraged. I take pen in hand, walk with me into the maelstrom. Would it were as simple in waking life as it is in dream to triumph over adversity. I hear his first words, a simple phrase. Thank you to Teo for having brought me to him. Then as Teo passes me in the doorway, he says my name, raising the last syllable to end in a question. When I fail to appear, I take a deep breath and walk into his study. He stood in front of the fireplace with his back to me. Something on the white marble mantel held his attention. He is just above 6 feet in height, but being broad-shouldered, he gives the impression of a much taller man. His hair is like a raven's plumage. He wore formal evening attire. When he finished inspecting the cluster of red needle-shaped crystals, he turned his attention to me. His eyes are enormous, almond-shaped, and of the palest gray, a silver dusk on a summer's day. They sought my gaze and held it in their depths. I recognized genuine interest, not momentary curiosity. I blushed and looked away, and then I returned his gaze, drawn by those twilight eyes. If he had an imperfect beauty, if his nose were hooked, his chin non-existent, his ears fleshy, his skin marked by enlarged pores, then with these negative aspects, a picture could easily be drawn. But when male features are regular, yet impart astonishment to the beholder, one must resort to a face on a Roman Greek coin statue, or a primeval god, or even a hero in a romantic novel, though most heroes are never too clearly described, so that the reader may be allowed to satisfy each and every personal inclination. Truly, Danough Gaylord is this and more. He has a perfect dark Irish beauty. Centuries of breeding have refined the coarser West Country aspects, honed them, burnished them until his flawless profile was thrust upon us. He is the majesty of face that one confronts in the miniatures of Hilliard, such as one finds in the frescoes of Della Francesca. There is magic in a beauty such as his. He gave me a small, qualified smile, walking the several paces from the fireplace to the door. He then gave me his hand in greeting. Welcome, Mr. Whyte. I hope this weather hasn't distressed you too much. Your trip was pleasant. No, sir. Yes, sir. I was about to say something simple like, "I'm pleased to know you." When looking away dartingly, I saw yet another French impressionist over his desk. "They are the most incredible paintings, sir," I agree with Mr. Brunel of Scribner's. "I think they are wonderful. They are light. I can't take hold of them in my mind yet. Are there any at Gaywyck?" "Why?" "To look at. To get to know. To understand, even. Perhaps. Somehow." He stared at me as if I were a needle-shaped crystal. I lowered my eyes. He turned and walked back to the fireplace. I waited for him to speak, but when I glanced in his direction, I saw him gazing into the fire. In profile, he seemed slightly flushed and irritated. After an interminable pause, he spoke very softly. "Did Father Collins tell you how fond I am of these paintings?" "No, sir. Only how unpleasant he found them." "Why, sir?" I was curious. "The answer to your question is no. There are none at Gaywyck. There are other wonderful paintings, but none of these. Keys hates them. Everard Keys, that is. My old music master, he hates them. Do you want one?" I thought I misheard him. "Do I want one?" "Yes. I have several in storage ready to be hung. You can take one with you tomorrow." "Have you any more by him?" I asked, dazed, pointing to the landscape. "Cezanne?" "Yes, I have several more of his. You can have that one." It's time I shifted them around. I'm beginning not to see them. By the way, I agree with you about Mr. Brunel. I read the Japanese do that, too. They claim seeing things in different settings keeps them fresh in the minds. I can't imagine ever becoming accustomed to these pictures, though. But it always struck me as a fine idea once I thought about it. "Yes," he said gravely, staring at me again. "Teo gave me the ideal originally." I blushed. The extraordinary house, the radiant art, the beauty of the man had exhilarated me and made me forward. I had risen from my shyness like a bird from a thicket, and suddenly shocked by my boldness unaccustomed to such freedom, I flew back to the safety of my defenses. "Are you interested in the Japanese as well, Mr. Whyte?" "Yes, sir, but I know very little." I blushed a deeper scarlet. I felt humiliated by not being able to control this effusion. I felt bewildered by my sudden collapse. "I am as well," he said, approaching me. Looking up, startled to see him in motion, I fought the impulse to flee, to hide. I stood still, locking my knees as he neared. I read compassion in his eyes. I felt calmed, though my heart raced. Placing his right hand clemently around my forearm so that his fingertips barely touched me, he smiled, comforting me in my distress. "There are several other impressionists in the library. Come, let me show them to you. We can continue our talk there. Would you like some sherry or port?" I shook my head, still unable to speak. Then I bravely looked into his eyes. We both smiled. His cologne was dry and musky, redolent of autumnal flowers. It gave me courage. "Thank you for being so kind, sir, and so patient with me." Holding my gaze while releasing my arm, he flushed slightly. "Mr. Whyte, I am neither kind nor patient." "Mr. Gaylord, sir, methinks you lie." Laughing, relaxed, we walked to the door side by side. On the way to the library, we paused to examine some Japanese prints hung along the corridor. He explained the ways in which they had influenced the French artist. Having the two forms alive before my eyes, I was able to grasp the concepts immediately. I heard names spoken aloud that I'd only read in magazines. I was amazed at how much I had retained. He seemed delighted with our conversation, but mostly I listened, intoxicated by his splendor. When animated, he was even more fascinating. He surrendered totally to his enthusiasm, revealing a vulnerable and tender spontaneity that surprised me, and I was charmed by his obvious, sincere concern for my enjoyment. The collection in the library was very impressive. The library was very impressive. I'd never seen so many books and periodicals gathered in one place. Every major artist involved in the movement was represented. He told me of the great exhibit in Paris, where he purchased several of his paintings. He described it with such fervor and with such an eye for details. The stupid jeering crowds, the space filled with these paintings, etc. That in the following years it appeared in my dreams. I felt comfortable with him, secure in his gentleness. This is a ferocious man, I mused. Only during the silences that occasionally intruded did I sense his reticence. The way his eyes dropped from mine, the quick smile that flickered across his face to allay panic. Those signs I easily recognized him. They helped me understand the bond between us. Beneath his dazzling exterior, I knew the uncertainty he, too, lived with. I saw it as my own. I think we introverted people, those of us who find it difficult to make contact with the outside world, know one another instantly. It is all in the eyes, yet each of us fears to acknowledge the other, lest by some bizarre chance we have misread him, and in acting too hastily expect a particular sensibility where none exists. He showed me the catalog from the 1895 exhibit and was delighted with my facility in French. We exchanged a few short pleasantries in the language, and though I read French, Italian, and German fluently, I had never spoken them with anyone but my father. When he asked after my talented father, I spoke of him without restraint or difficulty. I cannot say the same of my reactions to his discreet questions about my mother. He neither prodded nor interrupted with exclamations of condolence. Once I had begun, he listened. He was the only person who had asked me how I felt when I lost her. He listened to my sorrow, and when he did speak, it was to ask the precise question that helped me over whatever was blocking the telling of the simple story. At its completion, I burst into tears. I was so startled by my behavior that I became flustered, but before I could do anything foolish, like experienced shame, he rose from his chair and put a hand on my shoulder, consoling me with the warmth of his presence and the absence of any tension in his silence. Then he told me that he understood because he had experienced the same grief. His revelation confounded me, still collecting tears. My eyes met his. After a pause, he told me that his mother had suffered the same fate as mine. But Father Collins said... Father Collins says what everyone believes. It was what my father wanted. It was the easiest way. Very few know the truth. He smiled. With that sweet smile, he let me know that I had been told the truth because I had given of the truth. It was an exchange open and free of compromise. When Father Collins told me about you, Robert, I hesitated before suggesting Gaywyck. Then we decided it would be the best thing, given the circumstances. For now, you don't have many alternatives. There is no place for me to go. Then it's settled. For now, if later you change your mind and decide on a career, I'll assist you in any way I can. Perhaps, after seeing New York today, you'd prefer to stay in town. Good God, no, sir. Please, sir. Let me go to Gaywyck. Gaywyck is a vast and lonely place. I'm rarely there in the winter, and there will be nothing to amuse you. Nothing? A great library, miles to walk, the sea. And what about Denvers and Keys? Besides, sir, I have no interest in society. Books are my life. So I understand. I sensed a brooding hesitancy in his manner. Of course. If you don't want me to go. I don't want you to go, but I've convinced myself that everything will be manageable. I'm probably behaving foolishly, but I do think, for now, it's the best place for you. Denvers seemed pleased. You were joining them. That's a good sign. He will be your friend. Keys, on the other hand, is not well. He's living in the past and is regularly quite mad, but he's harmless. And then we talked of my duties, which consisted of devising a system for locating specific volumes in the vast collection of books. There were more than 75,000 titles in the two libraries at opposite ends of the first and third floors. I was not to alphabetize, because the time and energy required to shift the books were prohibitive, and were to be spent on more productive things. Like what, sir? Like reading, and walking miles, and bathing in the sea, and enjoying the music room. Do you play an instrument? No. Fine. A new pupil might be just what Keys needs. But what about the books, sir? Do the best you can with them. Concoct the simplest, cleanest plan. I don't care what, as long as it works. I'm bored with setting two servants to find a book whenever we receive a request. It's a great collection, and several universities use it. There is a catalog, neatly and correctly done, but it's useless when searching for the book itself. Every time a scholar writes, the staff goes into hiding. A knock at the door interrupted us. Teo entered and informed Mr. Danough that he must leave for the opera if he did not wish to be late. He reminded the master of Father Collins asleep in the front parlor. Good Lord! Father Collins? I forgot all about the man. Asleep? So much for my uncomfortable furniture. I'll be down immediately, Teo. Thank you. Robert, would you care to join me at the opera tonight? It's an interesting cast, and Lanau's out de Fligaro for a change. My heart started to pound with fear. No, sir, I mumbled. No. Thank you, sir. No. Next time, with more notice, he said gently. I'm certain you must be exhausted after your journey. Teo will show you to your room. We will talk again in the morning at breakfast. I nodded to him and watched him stride from the room. His candid, warm manner had been transformed before my eyes at the arrival of Teo. Still gracious, yes, but suddenly cool and slightly distant. I was disarmed by the way he avoided embarrassing me for my startling panic at his invitation. I was not intimidated by the alteration of his tone. I was intrigued. He was regrouping his forces to do battle with the world. I envied his self-control. Teo showed me to my room, spacious and beautiful, on the 4th floor, overlooking the park, with pale green walls that reminded me of spring and brought trees into the room. A full bathroom opened off to the left, and a silk-vested young man, a few years younger than myself, stood drawing my bath. An arrangement of flowers, smaller than the one in the foyer, but similar in selection, set on the writing table in the corner. In its presence, I felt Danough Gaylord. The room delighted me. Even now, sitting at the writing table, its elegance envelops me, and the delicate colors and sweet symmetry satisfy an eternal sense of order, with all the refurbishings and modernizations. It has been changed very little. Why meddle with perfection? The walnut furniture is still here, The gold and china Dresden clock ticks on the desk beside ever-present flowers. The translucent drapes are white with a pale green stripe. The carpet, a complex weave of white, green, and golden threads, covers most of the dark wood floor. The long wall opposite the two windows is still blessed by the same 5 enchanting Atamaro women arranged around the fireplace. But today, they do not glance over shoulders and from under large umbrellas at any Gladstone bag and wooden trunk placed beside the lustrous brass bed like true intruders from another world. How easily the tenses shift, the weight of years. How long ago it was, how present it is. The more I write, the more the one becomes the other. After an hour in the bath, using an orange-scented soap that floated on the water like a marigold blossom, a lime-smelling creamy white shampoo, and a golden oil the young man had carefully measured under the running spout. I dried myself, feeling smooth all over, with a massive, soft, thick white towel, G monogrammed in green. It had amused me to lie in a huge tub that balanced on 4 gilded paws and to follow the complex traceries made by the silvery pipes that twisted gracefully around corners and up the steaming walls, providing at a touch not only cold water, but an inexhaustible supply of hot as well. I would have stayed soaking and dreaming through the night if the young man had not knocked to announce my supper. Some cut sandwiches, cakes, and a pot of tea had been carried up with G engraved silver cutlery and china as white as the snow moon. The tray waited on the low table set in front of the fireplace. The sandwiches were the most delicious I had ever eaten. Cold meats mixed with mysterious cheeses. The teapot was a delicate white porcelain. Its tea, lemony fragrant and light brown, was perfect for the time of day. This is Elysium, I thought, as happiness rose, but an equal and opposite sadness immediately seized me when the association of my mother and her kingdom of the shades overtook me. I reflected on her for the first time with a modicum of detachment, having verbalized my weighty sorrow to Danough Gaylord, having sounded the depths and not been lost. I began to extricate myself from its numbing, paralyzing guilt. I touched my sorrow and wept again, aware that much of the pity was for myself. Whoever unpacked my nightshirt and robe placed David Copperfield on the bedside table, but had the discretion to leave my journal in the lining pocket of my Gladstone. I carried it to the desk, and finding some black ink in the drawer, there was also some blue and some mauve, but I only used black. I unscrewed my pen from its cork and began to detail the day. When the young man arrived to prepare the room for my sleep and to remove the tray, I rose and stood watching while he drew the drapes and turned down the bed. Since his hands were full with the tray, I opened the door for him. He thanked me and said, "Good night, sir." Sir, I thought. Me, sir? I laughed to myself and aloud. For the moment, happiness. Returning to my journal, I wrote for hours. 7:45 p.m. to 10:35 p.m. until my hand began to resemble a secret code and my head started nodding into the flowers. Then, after lowering the lamps, I scaled the vast bed, disturbing it as little as possible, though it was firm and deliciously pliant, and in sheets of the coolest, softest linen. I could not sleep. The white coverlet of a light, satiny material rustled whenever I moved. I figured its luxurious texture and began counting the silk summer clovers attached to its surface. The night sounds of horses' hooves clopping on the cobbled street, of strolling people in conversation, of strange dogs barking, footsteps and creakings within the house were all ordinary urban noises to those initiated, but for exhausted me, not conducive to sleep. I can't sleep, I sighed to one of tomorrow's dimly visible women. Shall I take another bath? Deciding against it, too noisy, I went down to the library for something to read. I wanted something light, something entertaining, something that would help me relax, yet not keep me awake all night. Having read most of the periodicals, I perused a bookshelf near the door, hoping to avoid the temptation of those paintings. I was tired. I wanted to go to bed. Finding an old friend, Emma. Familiar faces and all that sublime prose. I turned to go, then surrendered with a sigh to the pull of the canvases. Around the room I walked from one to the other, third time around, while moving closer to examine a cassette. I spotted a group of Gothic novels exquisitely bound in red leather, eschewing Emma for the unknown chills of Carmela and her famed coffin of blood. I removed it from its place, catching sight of a mysterious, reflecting surface behind. Taking down the other volumes, I uncovered a small glass display case. It contained 13 mounted headless bees. A legend attached to it read, La Vendetta, 13 Queens' Revenge, 1 Undeserved Sting, King Carmack, 18 May 1883. I shuddered. At 13 years of age, Cormac was a little old for such childish cruelty, or so it seemed to me. I returned everything to its proper place, including Carmela, and then restored Emma to its niche as well. Carmac's perversity upset me. I needed something exotic to distract me. Seizing a French novel with an odd title that I vaguely remembered reading about, as well as a French dictionary, I returned to my room. It was 11:30. After making myself comfortable in the bed, I opened the book. Nearly 2 hours later, while laying it aside to check a word, I was startled by the sight of Danough Gaylord standing in my doorway. I'm sorry if I frightened you, Robert. I saw the light under the door and thought you'd fallen asleep without extinguishing it. Forgive me for disturbing you, but when you didn't respond to my knock... You aren't disturbing me. Sir, please, come in. He walked into the room, pausing halfway to the bed. He carried a program. You're up rather late, Robert. I assumed you'd be exhausted and fast asleep long ago. I am exhausted, but I probably won't be able to sleep until I finish this amazing book. What are you reading? La Basse by Huysmans? You probably won't be able to sleep after you finish it either. We laughed. There was a pause. He moved closer. I hope you don't mind, sir. I chose it because of its title. I couldn't sleep. I found it in the library. Mind? Why on earth should I mind? You may read whatever you wish. Husbands, however, is not the path to pleasant dreams. I really have pleasant dreams, sir. After an unfilled pause, I added, Do you, sir? Do I what, Robert? Have pleasant dreams, sir. No, really. Rarely. He began pacing, turning his slightly flushed face from me in embarrassment. When he ceased to pace, he rested his arms on the brass railings at the foot of the bed. A smile expanded into a grin on both our faces. I think of this quiet moment as the genesis of our friendship. Cautiously, we drew toward each other. For an instant, we dropped our guards and our innocence. We perceived nothing beyond an incidental amity and the shock of communion. A lull, imposed by mutual reserve, opened between us. A deep ravine. We peered at each other across it, then glanced away, both still smiling dumbly. I heard myself speaking and felt as if I'd leaped into the air in an attempt to cross the divide. I could not believe the words I uttered. Is What troubles you? Your dreams, sir. Your brother Cormac? Danough Gaylord turned as white as an autumn mum. My brother is long dead, he said coldly. He died in a fire trying to save our father. I know, I said, flustered by his suddenly frigid manner. The decapitated bees buzzed in my brain. I wanted to explain, to apologize if I could, but he did not give me the opportunity. Good night, he stated abruptly. I suggest you put out the light and get some sleep, lest tomorrow you be too tired to enjoy the rest of your journey. Then he was gone. Instantly, I cursed myself, jumping out of the bed and rushing about the room like a person demented. I burst into tears. What in God's name made me say a thing like that? I prowled, repeating the conversation over and over, unfastening the link that had pulled Cormac Gaylord into my stupid, vacant mind, only to hook it all together again in stunned disbelief. As I retrod the way of our discourse, I became more amazed. I felt anew these fleeting seconds of harmony which I'd shattered, perhaps irrevocably by my insensitivity. With great effort, I calmed myself. My first impression of Danough Gaylord returned. My belief in his kindness, gentleness, and compassion sustained me. Though I knew I could not sleep, I turned out the lamp and got into the bed. A dull, persistent ache tormented me. I wanted to believe he would forgive me. I needed to believe he would forgive me. Closing my eyes tightly, I fought against tears. I whispered, soothing, that there was nothing to be gained by torturing myself. It was done, finished. Why was I in such a condition over innocently offending him? In a few hours, it would be morning. I would be going down to breakfast. When he appeared at table, his eyes would reveal all. I relaxed, dozing intermittently. I waited for the urban birds to herald the dawn. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.